directly with orgs, so people sort of stay in the context of the ladder of engagement and pulling up their activism within an organizational context.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've actually used Call Power last week. We were just talking about you too in another channel. So yeah, that's great. It's did I miss anyone else? Is there anyone else who is working on an app that we haven't already represented that wants to present about it? I do want us to kind of get into a bit of a Q&A to allow folks who aren't the app creators to kind of ask questions. And if nobody asks questions, I have questions for y'all, so we won't be lacking on content. But does anyone else have anything that they want to add to the mix? No secret apps you're developing? For instance, I have an app that will backtrace all Republican phone calls and make their phone stop working permanently. So, awesome. Okay, well, I would like to kind of have a Q&A here, and really, this should be more of a conversation, because really what's going on here is we have a lot of apps that are trying to do not the same thing, but utilize the same energy. And, we are all now connected through this great network. And not only do we have the connections of all having the same phone-based activism, but we have folks like OSDI and the National Voter File here who can add power to what we're doing. And so really, I guess the floor is open. For those of you who have the ability to use the chat feature on Zoom, if you wouldn't mind just typing in the word stack into the chat to everyone if you have a question, and we'll just use that as our ordering system. If you're on the phone, feel free to just say, hey, I have a question, and I'll throw you into the mix. Make sure. Ben has a question. And Ben, feel free to go ahead and ask. You're the first person. Go ahead and feel free to.
All right. So a question we started discussing on the National Voter File channel today was, in anticipation of this call, is thinking about accounts. We're looking at least authenticating applications to come into the National Voter File, and I could see that it kind of makes sense that there's a relationship between voters and accounts in these calling applications. So kind of a general question is, do most of these applications have accounts that you can log into? Do you use like Google or Facebook OAuth? Do you have your own? Or is this something that you'd be interested in sharing with some common infrastructure? How's that?
Well, y'all feel free to just go ahead and app creators feel free to answer.
I'll start 5 calls because I want to make sort of a related point here. We don't have accounts. We're trying to collect, we're trying to walk this line between collecting stats on who's calling, what offices, and where they're calling from, while still keeping things super, super simple. And I think that's something that we should all strive for, honestly. We're not going to get people in if they have to spend a whole lot of time logging into accounts. But really critically here, this is something that is not brought up in tech nearly enough. We need to be sure that if we are collecting personally identifiable user data, that we act super, super ethically about it. We are trying to not, despite the fact that location is super critical for figuring out who you're calling, we need to be very careful not to collect that in a way that it can be, requested by the government at some future time and identifying all the people who are, calling their reps about certain issues. I know it seems like they might be a little bit far out there, but I just want to make sure that we are all on the same page about this being I think a very real possibility, and at least have it in mind when you're developing these features in the future.
Yeah, it's really, I real quick want to interject that it's really great to hear you talk about that, because that's something that's very close to my mind as well. And it's so scary that we live in that time, but it's good to know that everyone should be thinking about it, because at the end of the day, we're not in this for money, and really that info is most valuable as data sold off to data houses. So I think it's good for us all, but I think most of us here are probably coming from that ethical place, and it's going to be a very delicate line to walk between, like, how much information do you need to really make this effective versus, what's just fluff and left over. App creators, anyone else want to add to that?
I'll just echo those comments. We've thought a lot about this question. On the one hand, we know that if we get to that place that we're not going to be the first person they subpoena, but we might be the fourth or fifth. We're not one that have too much more information than they can just get from Facebook. The other thing that we've thought about is exactly how much precision we need. And for example, we certainly are going to need to get the latitude and longitude, but do we need the seconds of the latitude and longitude? Probably not. So this is very much on our minds. And unfortunately, this is the fact that these concerns are real is the reason why we have to build these apps in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get John. Oh, I'm sorry. Keep going.
Yeah, one more thing in that I'm not sure how much of this is public or how much is I can say, but certainly part of our constraint and part of the reason that, for example, Facebook changed its terms of use surrounding data has to do with what I would consider questionable practices on the part of campaigns. And so we certainly have, this isn't hypothetical. We've certainly seen this in the real world. And so this is something we're very conscious of.
Awesome. Josh Levinger, and then Preston after that.
Yeah, thanks. I totally agree on the need for limiting the collection of PII, but just to note that often directly cuts against the needs of organizations to be able to contact folks in the future and to segment folks by interest or by location. So for example, I built a voter registration app that proxied information over to states. So I had to store people's full social security numbers, which really freaked me out. But after the election, I went through and minimized and deleted all that information. So certainly something to be aware of, but occasionally you actually do have to do stuff that would make you creeped out.
Oof. Preston.
Hey, so coming from a non-app developer, coming from somebody who has been in as a field organizer for presidential campaigns and working with movements, those apps out there that are targeted for calling voters, right, or calling constituents, calling the people that you're trying to target, and not necessarily calling or talking to your representatives and whatnot. What are there any methods or focuses on making sure that the numbers that we call, right, are as accurate as possible? So because for example, I've worked on, in this past election, we had 800 pages of numbers that were no good. And that was what the DNC had given us, right? So that was straight from Van. And that's an issue that I know with working with nonprofits and movements now is why waste the time and investing in an app, right? Money buying into an app that I don't get results from. So that's kind of, throw that out there, is anyone kind of focusing on that, or is that something that is just, well, it's the list is just as good as it is, if that makes sense?
Anyone take a swing at that?
I can talk a little bit to that. I think that most of the lists are pretty bad. I do think that Catalyst's lists are generally better than Van, partly because they go to different providers and pay more, and they particularly do a better job of cleaning the data. But in general, over time, the lists have gotten dramatically worse. And that's largely a function of changing phone habits. And it's really tough to see how that's going to get any better in the foreseeable future. Yeah.
Josh, sorry, I missed your earlier stack, brother.
Which Josh are you talking to?
Oh, I'm sorry, Josh going. Josh, go.
Okay. All right. Hang on, let me get back to the Zoom meeting here and turn my video on. Hey, all right. So, yeah, my name's Josh. I'm the chair of OSTI. We are a committee of progressive customers and vendors that have been working for a few years on a common API for things like people, events, petitions, lists, donations. I mean, pretty much, we want to cover all of the types that are needed, and the goal there is a number of things, right? I mean, personally, I'm very worried about what's going to happen with Trump, and so I think we need to be as efficient as possible and behave like, some of the large software engineering organizations. And so maybe what we might want to think about is having like a sort of common resources elements. And OSDI can be one of those where, you know, the work that you might do on, let's say, a gem for your Rails app to expose your stuff via OSDI can be shared among the other projects. And just the same, like when you have to think about, okay, how do I model a person or how do I model an event? Like you already have a starting point to go. So the Phone Your Rep guys, we did some work together at the Debug Politics hackathon that happened a few weeks ago, and I actually built your OSDI interface. What I noticed on the site that's up now, I don't see that, so I'm kind of curious to know what happened there.
Yeah, Matt, explain yourself.
We have it.
Non-compliant. Sorry.
We have, so the we kind of shifted towards the front end web app a little bit after the hackathon to try to get something out there. And they went with, it was easier at the time, just let them go with the API as it was built. So we actually have like 3. We're the next sort of stage that I'm working on is cleaning up the API and making it something that we can make public. And like right now we have 3 different like endpoints because they're all sort of in beta, but we're kind of honing in on what we want. If you go to the repo, there is at the top of that or at the very top of the repo, we do have the link to the HAL browser. It's still up there. But in the README, we have something that's a little bit closer to what our front end web app is consuming at the moment, mostly as a resource for people who want to contribute to that front end. But then, yeah, that's like sort of the next step. We want it to be fully OSDI compliant. I mean, I'd like to have 2 layers for it because not everyone who might want to use it will also be OSDI compliant. So I'd like to have some flexibility, but I want to be able to interface and try to encourage other people to use the OSDI standard, but mostly be able to interface with the ecosystem of apps that are already using it, for sure.
So we should probably have a follow-up conversation on that.
Yeah.
I think the other thing to consider too, right? People often, like they'll look at the OSDI spec and they'll say, my thing is not in there. And they'll assume that that means that the committee decided against it, which is almost always not the case. Basically, you know, our modus operandi is that, you know, for you, right, it's basically like mulling a representative and their contact information. And like that's been kicked around, you know, just in the brainstorming session, but we'll typically say, hey, unless we have someone who's actually coding an app that's going to do this, we're going to leave it on the back burner, because if you committee tries to specify it without having an implementer in the room, like we're going to get it wrong. So, like if you guys have thought of a good way to model that information, you know, it'd be great to bring that to the committee. And if it doesn't exist, we'll add it.
Cool. Yeah, I'm going to have to get somebody Thursday. I know the committee meetings are on Thursdays, and all of a sudden that's actually become a tough day for me. So I might have to get somebody else in on the project to be able to represent at the committee meetings. But that's like point taken. Like we need to be represented there. I have had a hard time being able to make it like recently.
Okay.
And in Matt's well, like, and I want to step in a bit because I've been helping to manage the project, the Phone Your Rep project. It's very dear to my heart. And we had already, I guess, before even the debug politics had already started, we'd already assembled kind of the guts of the data. And when all of this stuff with the confirmation hearings came out, we had to have the conversation like, do we want to wait and do this? Do we want to wait and slow play this when we could get something out the door that might make an impact right now? And that was kind of the community's decision. And one of the things about Phone Your Rep that makes it so interesting is that, like, while Matt is really the lead dev, like that's what I would call him in terms of it, it's not really any of our project. This came completely out of just the community's randomness. And so we kind of make sure that the community's voice was heard in the decisions that were made right off the bat. And that's one of the things that Rappi really stresses for the entire network is sometimes you just do what the community pushes for. And a lot of people were pushing for us to get it right out the door. And the data was in such a digestible form right out of the gate that it's made sense to switch right over to the widget. But the benefit is that one of the things I harped on them throughout the entire process was keep it stupid, lightweight, and simple, so that in the future, if things needs to change, it's not some convoluted monster that's going to take forever to migrate. So I think that one thing that would be great moving forward is to get that representation on the committee so that we can start that migration and getting it tuned up to compliance. There's obviously a lot of value in what OSTI is pushing for.
Yeah, so there was someone on Slack, I'm trying to find it now, who had, essentially it seemed like he was saying that he wanted to work on a Rails gem for the API OSTI server. I'm trying to track that conversation down now. Yeah, it was RTH found.
Yeah, that was Tad has been wanting to do that. Yeah.
You guys should y'all should start a convo up in Phone Your Rep. I don't want to rush y'all, but I do want to. We do have a bunch of to do now. But this is definitely a convo that should keep going. Obviously, this is the level of collaboration we're looking for too. We want to try to link these things together as much as possible to keep nice, clean, delicious data flowing. So let's see. So we've got Stephen, and then Sahil, if you still want to speak. If you still want to speak on that last stack, and then I'd like to ask the next question from the group.
Okay, I just had a quick question. Hopefully, it's a quick question for all of the creators on this conference. Do any of you would your apps, any of your apps, rely on voter information file, like the voter rolls, like National Voter File does? Or would any of your apps benefit from having access to the voter rolls state to state?
Yeah, so Grassroots PB, we definitely could or would use that information if we're going to be, because I mean, that would especially make it a lot easier for downstream clients of the app, like small campaigns, simplifying the steps for them in terms of having to go somewhere to get their list and then bring the list to us. If we could make it so that we can just generate the list for them, that would be cool. But
Great.
it's not like a necessity at this point, because we can just operate on like the standard model of like a campaign's responsible for its list and they bring it to us and we just serve it. So, but I mean, we'd love to have that integration in the future.
Okay, great. Sean, maybe you and I can touch base outside of this conference later on, and I'd like to get a little bit more background on exactly how that would work for you. If anybody else has the same need or interest, or if you know anybody that's working on an app that would rely on voter rolls or would benefit from access to voter rolls, contact me. Just do a DM in the Slack. I'm Desmond Jones, and just contact me. Let me know who to talk with. We're working on something that we're trying to see what we can do to get access to this, and the more apps that can use it, the more people that could benefit from accessing it, the better. So anyway, that's it. Thanks.
So Call Them is actually very interested in this as well. One of our plans, not immediately, but as we go into the next election cycle, is to allow small campaigns, even state legislative and local races, to generate door knock lists, walk lists, cut turf, even right through the app. And I'm actually assigning my students to model the National Voter File project. So
cool, that's great.
That's awesome.
Part of what's actually really important is to validate those those models. Because if you look at, say, the Obama campaign in 2012, if you look at the difference between, say, the commercial data and the campaigns data, the campaigns data was way better, even though it was a really, really simple model. And the reason why the campaigns data was better is because they knocked on a bunch of doors and were able to ask people, who are you voting for? So even a relatively simple model will go a long way. And so that's part of what we want to do, is to figure out that we're if we can build the back end right, we can constantly feed this data back in and constantly improve and iterate the model. And that's actually the direction we want to move towards.
Great. Matt, what you said students. Students where?
I'm a prof at George Washington University. So I actually I teach data analytics every semester these days.
This is.
I actually have had them do one assignment anyway. So they may get a state. I'd have to build a model. And so then we'd have to go and check it. And it sounds complicated, but it's actually just 2 or 3 variables, 3 or 4, get you 85, 90% of the way there compared to a really sophisticated commercial model.
Okay, I'm a non-coder, so everything sounds complex to me, but cool, thanks. Okay, great. I'll drop off, and but anybody else, like I said, please just try to reach me in the Slack, and we'll chat. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Stephen. Good questions. Jody had a question earlier too, which I think is very interesting. She's a mail nerd, and she was talking. She asked about Jody. Why don't you go ahead and ask? You have a microphone. I'm not going to steal your words.
Oh,
go ahead and ask your question about the.
Yeah, it was just sort of a general question to the extent that I've spent too many years caring about the postal network. If anyone was interested, those are the skills I have to offer, let's say. I mean, if you imagine Miracle on 34th Street, you know, the piles of mail, the materiality, the physicality of that demonstrated something a little different than phone call busy and email. And I know there's a cost, but just sort of raising the hand.
I'm personally in favor of any app that's going to spam the district office of a senator with too much mail for their staffers to literally carry. But the environmentalist in me cringes at that as well. Can we make sure all the mail is on recycled, compostable material?
Yes, you can. Actually, I negotiated with Royal Mail and when I was employed with Bank of America to create something called the sustainable rate in the UK. The USPS was not interested in that particular category, but there are other ways to make sure, besides the fact that mail isn't inherently worse for the environment than email. But there's a program called Secure Destruction that the Postal Service will securely destroy the pieces if it's undeliverable as addressed and if it's first-class mail. There's also a bridge product that I've been beta testing with the Postal Service for the last 2 years that'll be launched nationally in 2017. And if you wanted to test it live, there's no charge right now. But basically, the Postal Service is scanning the physical mail that's en route to the citizen. The citizen signs up for a free email preview of the physical mail they'll be getting later that day. The person sending the mail can add a URL or something to the email notification on a daily basis to do a click to call, a click to pay, whatever it might be. And it's often useful for the individuals that travel or are busy and not able to, you know, I'll send you something here about how to sign up for that.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind dropping that in the discussion channel, that'd be great. And again, those of you who may have missed it, you can go into the Slack and go to the hashtag discussion channel. I don't know the nomenclature for that. Go to the discussion channel, and anything relevant we can post up in there. Awesome, that's cool. And I mean, I think that you know, anything that could. I'm in favor of anything that makes our freaking elected representatives do their jobs. So A+. I believe Pamela is stacked up next.
Just very briefly, I have to drop.
Oh yeah,
off.
go for it, Matt.
I have to drop off because we're actually doing an onboarding call.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
So I'm very glad to at least start this conversation. I'm happy to chat with all of you. I see there's a question in the stack about integrating texting. We are planning on doing that, and we're planning on integrating Facebook Messenger as well. And so we will see the extent to which we can figure out how to use those effectively. So thank you all very, very much. And yeah, hit me up on the Slack.
Thanks so much, Matt. Appreciate it. And Pamela, you want to go ahead and you still stacked up?
Yeah, I just have a quick question. I'm an activist, and I've been using and pushing a lot of the products that you folks are building, and have been getting a lot of feedback from certain politicians, constituents who are refusing to answer phones, have just disconnected the lines or have let them go to voicemail and people can't get through. And I'm wondering if there's a way that what Jody's expertise in mail could be linked up to, you know, those certain offices in that event. I've been referring people to, I think it's called faxzero.com, where you can send a free fax to the people who are not picking up their phone. But just throwing that question out there.
Is the question, what do we do about people who don't answer their phones?
Yeah, is there an alternative being thought of for the, like Pat Toomey, he refuses to answer phones, refuses to have town hall meetings. There are lots of them out there, and you know how Trump disconnected all the White House lines, and you know, so are there alternatives when politicians in the Trump era decide it's not important to talk to constituents?
That is a big question. That is a question that could be answered on an entire call. Because really what you're asking is, what's the next step after phone-based activism? And that was actually something I wanted to bring up. We are a little over time right now, and I think that this would be a good chance to move the discussion to the discussion channel in Slack. But I do want to, if someone else was stacked, I believe. Preston had a question for Jody. No, okay. I really would like to just leave with everyone thinking about this is all great what we're doing now, and it's valuable, especially for campaigns, to have these call-based applications available to them, because it will help get the non-activated activists started. But we all need to remember that phone-based activism only goes so far, because eventually we will run into the problem that Pamela just described to us, is what do you do when they stop listening? What are you doing? What do you do when they hang up? So we need to think about how we turn. Yeah, I like Sean's answer right there. And I'm a huge fan of canvassing. That's going to be something we're going to move into come spring, the warmer months. We are going to talk about canvassing and helping apps with like door-to-door style stuff. But one of the things that we can do as we collaborate on these phone-based tools is, how do we leverage this into creating more people on the ground? How do we turn this energy from, because once they start making the daily calls, like what's the next step? How do we get them to start making daily conversations with people in front of them, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, thank you everyone so much. This was really great. This was one of my favorite calls so far. It's been really great to hear from everybody and see so many people interested. And but we can keep the discussion rolling, please, in Slack. You know, we can start threads if anyone has questions, so that we can keep up with them, and you know, folks have a couple days to answer. Obviously, if anyone has any questions about prod code related activities, or if you want to get involved in the behind the scenes stuff, please feel free to reach out to any of us that have the little prod code staff tag in our profiles. And yeah, thanks y'all. That was awesome. Very much appreciated. We'll post this up on our YouTube channel as soon as we can.
Thank you.
Have a good night. Good luck in Trump's America.
Thanks. Good night, everybody.
Good night.